Hello everyone and welcome to my review for Jujutsu Kaisen chapter 211. As always, if you haven't already, definitely be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'd like to try and hit at least 100 likes in this week's review. And now then, without any further delay, let's get right into the discussion. So, I think this week's chapter may have caused a little bit of confusion amongst some people. Because, well, it goes over the culling game rules, and the culling game rules can be kind of confusing because there are a lot. Well, I say a lot, there were like 10 originally, and a lot of them have a bit of overlap. So it's kind of important to go over why they don't work, why people don't understand them, how they work, why the proposed rules that the Jujutsu people were going to add in, they really can't, because either they wouldn't work the way they intended or they can't be allowed. But first things first, start of this chapter. First off, this chapter is called The Ripening, or Ripen, depending on which translation you're reading. And we see that there appears to be a change in the colonies. It looks as if they are expanding to technically envelop all of Japan, in a way. Because at the start, they look to be fairly distinct. They're like these big beacons in each of the colony locations, and we see the barriers spreading to contain more people. And now you still have the shining lights from the colonies, but they no longer seem to be as defined, and now there is a glowing light surrounding the entirety of Japan. This likely has something to do with Tengen's barrier, as now, in this chapter, we're back on the 16th of November, and it's noontime. So, some time has passed since the stuff with the Tomb of the Star. We see Chozo's met up with Kirara. They've conveyed what happened to Maki. And now Maki is met up with the Tokyo number 1 people. So quite a bit of stuff's going on. I kind of would have liked to have seen that interaction. That would have been nice to get, I suppose. It would have been nice to see Maki meeting up with everyone initially. But you know how Gege is sometimes. Not everything's going to get shown off. It's not the most important thing ever, but it would have been nice to see, you know? But this means now our protagonists are fully aware of the situation that they're facing, and how things have gotten quite a bit more dire. It's probably safe to assume that the transformation we see with the colonies is reflective of either the culling game moving on to a new stage entirely, either expanding and now trying to get more people into it, though we don't see any of these people being shown Kogane, so maybe that's not necessarily the case. Or it's supposed to show something involving Tengen's barrier, Kenjaku taking control of it, or something like that. I think it's deliberate on Gege's part that we don't see what happened with Tengen after that fight was over. Now we're just seeing the aftermath everywhere else. I imagine it's going to be a bit of a big reveal later. As for the rules, there are some things that are explained. It's explained why Yuta and Hikari didn't add the new rules yet, because that was something that was brought up a while ago, is, hey, why haven't they added the rules yet? It's been like 2 days since they got the points they needed. What's going on? And this is where we get to the part where they explain why the first rule they added was fine, but the other ones weren't. So the point transference, that was added to allow players to not be subject to curse technique removal without having to kill anybody. They could just be given points, so the point value changes within the 19 days. They are not subject to what is essentially a death sentence. As for the entry and exit of the colonies and communication across borders, there is no part of the rules that explicitly states that you're not able to do that. However, that's because that is just a function of the barriers because they're barriers. Something we already know about barriers is that they can kind of have certain rules set up within them just based on how they function. You look at veils and such. We know veils block communication, like cell phone signals can't get through them. So that wouldn't even be a rule thing. That's just because of how they function, you wouldn't be able to communicate between colonies. As for entry and exit, well, there was never a rule stating that you couldn't. It may just be a function of the barrier. So let me explain how this works, because this is also something that the random placement sort of falls under, is the barriers are a space within the culling game, or a space within which the culling game's rules can be enforced. However, there are certain conditions that are put into a barrier when it is created. You look back at the one from the Goodwill event, the condition placed upon it was that anyone can enter and leave except for Satoru Gojo. Gojo can't enter. Anyone else can come and go as they'd like. But no one was able to call anyone on the phone within or without the barrier, because that's how barriers work. So in this case, the culling game rules are just something established within the confines of the barrier. But as for the barriers themselves, you can't move between them, you can't leave them like a normal veil, you can't call people between them like a normal veil. And as for the random placement, that just seems to be one of the conditions placed upon the barrier. So those things are totally separate from the culling game rules, and thus adding rules for that into the culling game won't make any difference. Maki is able to pass freely between them because since she has 0 cursed energy, the barriers and the culling game don't even recognize her existence. And Angel's able to move between them because she's able to just kind of nullify the effects of the barrier for herself. And she's only able to do that on her own, because in order to remove the barrier itself, she would have to find its origin point and then use her technique on it. Otherwise, it's effectively got a range of herself only. I imagine that may be a thing that comes up later, them trying to find the source of the barrier and remove it so that people can escape, probably when things get really bad later. So that was the reason they didn't add those two. The fourth one, leaving the culling game, they try to add that in, but the issue is that it actively contradicts some of the other rules. So the culling game, Kogane, gives a suggestion, which is essentially you can substitute yourself for someone outside the game by spending 100 points. So it costs 100 points to swap out with somebody. This, I think, proves again something that was said earlier that I think some people have forgotten, is that there is not a game master. The culling game is self-sustaining, it runs itself. There is not a person running it. In order to avoid bias, that was one of the trade-offs in the binding vow that Kenjaku had to make in order to create the culling game. So, no, Sumiki is not the game master. We'll get into that in a bit. There is not a game master, as far as we understand, based on the information we have been given and the way the culling game has been explained to us. It is a self-playing game. There is nobody in charge of it. Kenjaku just set it up and it's running on its own. It's going to run its course, and then he's going to reap the benefits of it. Now, we get on to Sumiki, because they make this rule, everyone is told the rule, and then we meet Sumiki, who we meet kind of casually, in all honesty. Maki meets up with Ijichi, who shows up again, it's been a while, with Sumiki, who they found. I guess they would have been able to find her relatively easily because they would have known what hospital she was in, and, she hasn't entered a colony yet, which she has to do soon, because if the marked players don't join within 19 days, they'll be subject to technique removal and die, which I guess goes to show that there is the colonies, and then there is sort of this second barrier that was mentioned that I know confused some people. In order for the rule of players having to enter the game to be enforced, there would have to be some sort of exterior field, some sort of secondary barrier that everyone's in already that enforces this rule. I believe it's effectively Kenjaku using Tengen's barrier the same way that he used it to do a wide-scale idle transfiguration that activated the game. So it's probably something like that. Actually, now that I think about it, maybe the culling game barrier isn't the colonies. It's just Tengen's barrier, or some similar barrier. And, you know, the colonies are just things that he set up that are technically their own things, but are part of the rules of the wider barrier. I guess that might be the case. Well, this kind of recontextualizes my perspective of, well, really not much in general, but I suppose it may give me a better understanding of these things. Though I don't do these reviews for me, I do them for you guys. Well, I do them because I like them, but I like them, I like that you guys watch them. Hopefully it's improved your perspective of the culling games as well. Anyway, we got like a short little Gojo panel of him being an asshole to Ichichi, but in a helpful way because it stopped him from becoming a shit-tier sorcerer and getting killed. And then Sumiki joins the game. We get like a neat little scene with Hana and Yuji reacting to Megumi acting all stoic. Hana thanks Yuji from making him sound, or for making her sound good, because she was like flying around in case Sumiki got teleported in from the sky or something. You know, raising the stocks in Megumi's eyes. And they have like a little snarky bit about Megumi trying to act cooler in front of his family members, or trying to act more stoic in front of them, like he's in his rebellious phase or something, which is funny. It also makes the Nobara thing from last chapter seem even more artificial. Anyway, they give Sumiki 100 points to swap out with someone. Probably Ijichi, I think. I think it is Ijichi that should be swapping out with. Because, yeah, he's like basically a normal person, but he still can kind of use cursed energy. He may have some kind of technique. He just wasn't fully trained to be a sorcerer, so he's better off than some random person. But then Sumiki introduces the rule for traveling between colonies, which, you know, they weren't gonna do because it would be a pointless addition, because the way the colonies function as barriers already prevents that. It's not a rule thing. So, as Sumiki gives this really spooky, evil look, one must question, who the fuck are you? Why are you doing this? So, if I understand correctly, if I understand this right, vessels take on the names of the host, unless, I think, the host is not the person in charge. So, Hana is there under her name, Yuji's there under his name. They're both hosts, but they're symbiotic hosts. They have control over their body to some extent. But you look at the reincarnated sorcerers, which seems to be the main difference. It seems like there's a difference between reincarnated sorcerers and people who are like Yuji and Hana. You know, Kashimo, Ryu, Uro, they are under their original names, because those are the people that are in control. Sumiki is still under her own name, which means she is maybe a host, but not a fully reincarnated sorcerer. And what we see here with her eyes changing is probably the sorcerer taking over. You'll notice her original eyes, which are like all dark. They're much softer. whereas these ones, towards the end of the chapter, they're white center, more piercing, kind of spooky looking. Clearly, a change has occurred within her, and that is presumably someone else taking control. There are alternate possibilities, such as Kenjaku having meddled with her brain to change who she is. I guess that's possible. Don't know how likely that is. I feel like the host one is more likely. It also opens up a possibility that I've heard at least one person suggest, which is that the sorcerer that's inhabiting her body is an ancient 10 Shadows user. So we could see 10 Shadows versus 10 Shadows. Maybe the opportunity for Megumi to finally tame Maharaga, which would be cool. It would be cool if that's kind of like a dedicated thing where we have like multiple of Megumi's actual allies here to help him instead of him using it as a suicide technique. That would be cool. It would also mean theoretically Sumiki could summon Maharaga as a suicide move. I guess that is also an option. And maybe Sukuna will get involved in this in some way, because, you know, Sukuna is very invested in Megumi. Probably more so in Megumi's technique, but who knows? Maybe if Sumiki has the same technique, he'll be like, oh, fuck Megumi. We'll go with Sumiki. But then, another counter-argument, it's not just Megumi's technique, it may also be Megumi's potential. He is indeed kind of a prodigy, so it's partially that as well, I suppose. But I guess we're going to have to see what will happen next week. Presumably, whoever is inhabiting Sumiki's body, whether that's Sumiki herself or another ancient sorcerer, must be kind of strong. Because it seems like they're kind of picking a fight with Megumi, who's pretty strong, Yuji, who's pretty strong, Hana, who's hacked as fuck, and Takaba, who is, Takaba. Oh, and Maki will show up at some point, I guess. And you never know who else could get involved. We're still in Tokyo Colony number 1, so effectively everyone in the colony is a potential player. Well, I mean, they're already a player. You know what I mean. Anyway, that's pretty much all I got for this week's review. If you enjoyed, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you don't miss any of my uploads. I do Jujutsu Kaisen chapter reactions and reviews every week that we get a new chapter. If you enjoy discussing Jujutsu Kaisen with other people, or you just enjoy the content I produce on this channel, I highly suggest you check out my Discord server. I have a link to that down in the description. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys around. Take care.